Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your hosts Sam Foote.
And Anne Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Microsoft 365 focused IT security professionals.
It's episode 20 of season 4. Sam and I had a recent discussion around Microsoft Entra ID, a cloud identity provider that enables an organization to have a single identity across multiple SaaS applications. Here are a few things we covered. What is a cloud identity? What capability does Microsoft Entra ID have? What security features are available? And how is it licensed?
We've noticed that a large number of you aren't subscribed. If you do enjoy our podcast, please do consider subscribing. It would mean a lot for us to show your support to the show.
It's a really great episode, so let's dive in.
Hey Alan, how you doing?
Hey Sam, not doing too bad. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Countdown to Ignite is on. It sounds like it's going to be a packed event, and not jealous at all that you're attending.
Yeah, it's only just under 3 weeks, I think now, or just under that now. So yeah, it's gonna be fun. Lots of MVP activities and things like that, and helping out. So it's not going to be a quiet week. Definitely not.
Oh, that's I suppose that's kind of good, isn't it? Especially if you're out there. It keeps you focused as well, right? It's not just the announcements and the new content. It's actually participating in it to some degree.
Yeah, definitely, and catching up with other organisations, or just catching up with the community and helping out where we can, or where I can, I guess. So yeah, I look forward to it. Look forward to catching up with people.
Yeah, no, it's going to be great. So Alan, this week, Microsoft Entra ID, formerly known as
Azure AD, yeah.
Have you got used to the new name yet? Because I don't think I have. Maybe actually, I'm getting better at it. To be fair.
Yeah, I think I'm mostly Entra ID. I have to keep reference back to it because you do get a few blank faces when you sometimes say it. You're like, oh yeah, Azure AD, and they're like, oh yeah, okay, get it. So
yeah, it's all the
almost
sub products, services names that I still haven't quite got yet. Do you know what I mean?
Azure AD joined, yeah. No, it's Entra ID joined now, yeah.
Yeah, and it's
this episode's really because we talked about some of the capability and stuff like that, but we've never really talked about Entra ID as a cloud identity or as a solution generally and why it's used. Talked about everything else it does. So it's a bit of I guess it's kind of an assumption that we've probably had that everyone knows what it is and what it does.
Yeah, I think if we had been a bit more clever or planned it a bit better, that maybe we should have covered the sort of the base topics first, if that makes sense, right? Not just diving into technologies that we're excited about, which is usually the way that the schedule gets put together. But no, it's good. It's good to circle back for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool. Let's get started. So Alan, what's a cloud identity?
Yeah, so a cloud identity is, as it kind of sounds, an identity in the cloud, but it's used for it's in effect it's a can be provided by an identity provider, a cloud identity provider like Microsoft Entra ID, Azure AD as its previous name, or other solutions out there like Okta. And in effect, this is it's in effect a directory of users where you can create their identities, their usernames, their passwords, and then they can use that to then sign into services. So, from Microsoft Entra ID, that the example of that is sign into Office 365. It might be communicate using that identity for a cloud service like ServiceNow, Dropbox, etc. Using other technologies to do that sign in. But really, the history of sort of cloud identities has been, as as everyone in the past sort of probably 5 to 10 years now, been moving, starting to move slowly to cloud services. One key area is managing identity. In various applications, SaaS applications, it's trying to simplify that, secure it, and also bring on, remove the sort of need potentially for interactions with maybe your on-premise identities, because most organizations will have an Active Directory and have an identity there, and then they as they moved to the cloud, they then had multiple identities in multiple applications, and then having to manage that, secure them, and then cloud identity providers then sort of centralize that single identity for a user, and then allow them to then reuse that in multiple places, whilst putting security and that on it today.
In my simple sort of thought process, is it really a matter of convenience? Workloads shifting from like on premise into the cloud. It kind of makes sense to have your your identities at least synchronized into the cloud at that point, or attempting to make your cloud identity your primary identity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely, and it's moving your organization, almost having an organizational identity in the cloud for for those cloud services, because like I said just now, that if you're in if you're using SaaS applications or even internal cloud applications that you're hosting, having multiple usernames and passwords to manage is difficult. It's not not unachievable, but if you think about when people leave, people join, how many times you've got to then create 12 user accounts and 12 different passwords for the user to remember. And you're right, it's kind of a convenience thing as well as security, because you might forget to disable an account and that password's leaked, and then that service is compromised, but you don't know about it because you're not monitoring everything, kind of thing. So having a centralized identity allows you to then monitor it in one place, and also control the access to multiple applications and services from from that single place.
Okay, so Alan, can you just sort of give us a a whistle stop tour of some of the capabilities of Entra ID?
Yeah, sure. So Microsoft Enter ID, as I said, allows you to have user identities in there, so it's used and provide like a directory, and as it kind of sounded before, it being called Azure AD, it's very similar to Active Directory on premise, as an identity store. But yeah, it gives you your identities. It provides some of the security features like MFA, conditional access. It allows you to be able to, as I kind of said, do single sign-on into SaaS applications or internal applications using various technologies. It has, depending on the SKUs you have, it allows you to do identity governance, so you're able to manage your identities. It can also help with your joiner, mover, leaver process, so automating your onboarding of your staff, as well as them leaving and removing their access and accounts. It has the capability of, because it was kind of part of or heavily integrated into Office Microsoft 365. It does sort of RBAC roles in there as well as for Azure. And then there's there's quite a bit around identity access and the security of your identity. So there's various tools like identity protection and conditional access and a few things like that.
Nice. So I assume, that's I'm guessing a lot of sort of cloud focused solutions there, but also, migration of like more traditional, identity features that you would have had like previously on prem with things like, Active Directory.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, the key sort of the actual user accounts, things like that. It definitely had a similar feel, especially in the early early days of Azure AD. Definitely felt like Active Directory, but not necessarily having multiple organizational units, things like that. Just a single OU, a single list of users. In that, and I guess one other part is that it can also do. It can also have devices registered in there, whether it be on-premise ones or cloud-based devices.
And what's you know what's the difference between other sort of cloud technologies like management tools like Intune as an example, right? You have machines that are, is it Entra ID joined now? Is that right? Did I get that right? Or is it Entra joined? Entra
Enter ID joined, yeah.
Entra. Okay, sorry. But what's the difference there between joining it on the Entra side and maybe with a device management tool as well?
Yeah, so you can if you enroll it into within Intune, then that's obviously a mobile device management technology, so that's able to do the management of the device. A prerequisite of that is that the user has to be part of the Entra ID for its identity to be in Intune, being first party in that. But from the device joining side of things, the Entra ID or Entra domain joined, I think it might actually be Entra domain joined, is where in effect your device, you sign in with your cloud identity solely into the device, and all of your identity is in effect that cloud identity, not an on-premise Active Directory one. So all your authentication is with Microsoft Entra ID. So all your, in effect, anything you're signing into there. So if you're signing into Office apps on the device, it's all single sign-on because it knows who you are because you're using the same identity. And the same thing when you go to other SaaS applications. Your identity is that identity. So it acts like Active Directory, but in the cloud at that point, kind of thing. And then I guess the other type there is the hybrid joined, and that's when a device is joined to Active Directory, but also enrolled in effect into Microsoft Entra ID. So again, you can use both identities, and it's all single sign-on kind of thing. It sort of matches them up at that point.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Alan. And just talking about, we've spoken about it previously, but how do you get on-premise IDs up into the cloud? I assume there's lots of organizations still out there with Active Directory still deployed. That's still a big technology that I see day to day.
Yeah, so as the sole purpose originally for Active Directory at the time was to bring your your on-premise identity to the cloud for Microsoft 365 when it first was born, kind of thing. So there's a AD Connect, AD Connect Cloud and AD Connect Sync tool that allows you to then do a synchronization of your on-premise identities to the cloud. So it's in effect one way that your Active Directory IDs are your source of truth for those identities, and they get synchronized up. And you can choose which identities are synchronized by organization units and other filters. yeah, so you can bring those identity up, and then that's where when you have your hybrid join devices, it can then match your local AD identity with your cloud identity, so it knows who you are from that perspective. So yes, a lot of organizations today have AD Connect in place. There is a new version of it called Cloud Connect. So what you need for the I guess the traditional, I guess we could probably call it now, is the AD Connect sync. You have a server on premise that in effect synchronizes your identities between the cloud and AD, and that can do as other technology in there about how to authenticate. So potentially you can do password hash sync, where your passwords from Active Directory are then synchronized up in a hash, salted a couple of times. You can do pass-through authentication, where you have agents on premise that when an authentication takes place up in the cloud, the request comes down to your local AD to be authenticated. Most organizations use the password hash sync. Previously, you were able to use ADFS, but as a lot of organizations are moving away from that now. The cloud sync connector, in effect, has a small agent that sits on premise, and then all your configurations done in the cloud. So that's the way we're moving towards, but there's just some feature parity that's just missing on that at the moment, but it's close for transitioning. But yeah, it's really can be really simple to do, to set up. It does depend on the size of your organization, how many users. Because I've worked with universities where they have a couple of thousand staff and then 20,000 students, and those being synchronized up. But yeah, it definitely works, and relatively simple to set up depending on your Active Directory configuration.
Cool. Is it just normal users that you can have in Entra ID, or are there other types of users that you can add in?
So it's probably three types. So if we talk about the on-premise identity, so AD, the AD Connect Sync, so they are on-premise or AD server sort of identities. You then have cloud identities, so the ones that are created in Microsoft Entra ID itself and managed up there. But then you can have guest accounts, B2B accounts, which we briefly talked about a couple of weeks ago, which are users that are from other tenants, other Microsoft Entra ID tenants with Office 365, and they can be used for collaboration within Teams and SharePoint and things like that, or potentially accessing your applications that are integrated with Microsoft Entra ID.
Okay, so just following on from that, how does it integrate with SaaS applications?
Yes, there's various ways to do this. So really, the main way is a SAML 2.0 authentication. So in effect, the SaaS application sets the Microsoft Entra ID as the identity provider. So Microsoft has a gallery of applications that they've pre-configured or have got in effect templates for, and then you go in there, you create it. Microsoft does have some great documentation about setting up the integration with a lot of SaaS applications. But yeah, once you create that sort of connection and you create that SAML connection, then you can then bring your when you go to that logon page of that SaaS application, it will bring you back to Microsoft Entra ID to do the verification there. So it's really quite simple. Well, it can be quite simple in some scenarios. Some of the other ways is OpenID, and There is the capability of Microsoft Azure AD. It's probably called Entra ID now. App proxy, application proxy. So this allows you to bring SaaS, bring on-premise applications to the cloud. So that has the capability of, in effect, being a reverse proxy into your environment. So this is for web applications, and in effect, what it can do is it can Kerberos or single sign-on into on-premise applications. So if you've got a sort of a legacy application that can only do Kerberos and authentication with Active Directory, you can use the app proxy, tell Microsoft Entra ID the internal URL. It can create an external URL for you, but you have the power of Microsoft Entra ID as the front door. Kind of what we were talking about briefly in last week's episode around DDoS attacks. Having Microsoft services in front to protect against that. But what that does also mean is that you can put all the Microsoft Entra ID security capability in front of it as well, without needing to change the application. So we definitely see a lot of that being used to bring on some of the sort of legacy authentication mechanisms, being allowed to expose them to the internet on the cloud securely.
Okay, so just sort of following on from that, because we've seen a lot of sort of identity related functionality and features that we've talked about, but I suppose organizations could be concerned of security, of moving things outside their perimeter. What security capabilities are there within side of Entra ID?
Yeah, so there's quite a few things here, because you're right. Organizations moving to the cloud or in the cloud, it's another attack vector. It's another perimeter to look after, and we're now seeing organizations being targeted for their identity because it is the keys to all the services, rather than attacking devices. So one of the key sort of areas is conditional access. Conditional access is in effect the gates to where a user can sign in and what they can access. So you can be very granular about what a user can do. So this uses signals from the IP address they're coming from, their location, what application they're accessing, maybe what group they're in, and what device they're connecting with. And using those signals, you can then determine whether they can access a service for that. So it might be that you say you can only access Microsoft 365 if you're on a managed device via Intune, or it's a hybrid join device. It has to be from Windows. It has to be a Windows device, and you have to come from the corporate network, or from the UK kind of thing, or the US, etc. That then limits where you can sign in. But as part of that as well, you can then enforce multi-factor authentication. So you can specify what type of MFA now as well. What strength. If there's a phishing resistant MFA, so using FIDO2 keys, using passwordless authentication, the Microsoft authentication app, versus maybe a phone or a call, text, etc. So it's very powerful in you can limit. Maybe you've got some high risky users like your finance team that you only want to be able to access the finance application, or the finance SaaS application from the office, or from a managed device. Other parts kind of in there is the Microsoft Entra ID identity protection. So using Microsoft Security Graph, and all their signals from all the other tenants, as well as from their feeds from other security services, including their red team and blue teams, bringing that data in, and then assigning a risk level to a user's sign in or a user itself. and then you can use those signals again within conditional access to block a user from access. One thing that sort of service does as well is because Microsoft, if you're using password hash sync, Microsoft can normally acquire the lists of passwords being sold on the dark web, and then they can do it in effect a check against your organization's usernames and passwords, not knowing the passwords specifically, but the hashes, to see whether that identity has been compromised somewhere. And if it has, then it can specify that user is a high risk, and then it can force a password reset, and that could be in the cloud or on premise as well. So it can do SSPR, self-service password reset, back to on premise as well. And then kind of around, that's kind of the key main things for the security side of things. It's protecting your identity from being used and being accessed. Probably any other parts around it is the authentication methods. So Microsoft have been bringing and pushing for passwordless authentication. So removing the requirement for a password to be used. So they've been bringing in password authentication for quite some time now, and they're bringing in there's quite a few now that have come into GA and are used quite heavily. And from a user experience, it's great because you sign in with you type your username in, and when you get to put your password, it's like, hey, we're doing passwordless now, so let's tell me, do your code check. Type the code that's on the screen onto your device, and then do a PIN check on that device itself, and then there's no password. And that's great because one, user doesn't have to remember that password, and two, when you're signing in and maybe you've got the device they're on is compromised, with keyloggers, etc., there's no password being written at that point. So it's definitely a step forward there.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of capability there. Yeah, and like you say, I think the words you used were, it's a new perimeter that you've got to protect. It's good that there's a lot of potential capability there, all managed by Microsoft as well. I mean, you could take that in a couple of ways, really, right? Because some organizations want the control, don't they? Of running things themselves, creating their own perimeters, X, Y, and Z. But it is a very modern approach now to sort of shift that risk, maybe to your supplier, and sort of trust that Microsoft's product development teams are going to be more advanced than your own sort of internal security controls.
Yeah, and there's probably one thing I probably missed out on, and that's probably there's it's got some RBAC roles there for within the product to to manage certain areas. So you can have group management, user management, and things like that. But as we sort of said before, it jumps into into Azure for the RBAC. It's used by by this, as well as there's Azure AD roles, which then map into Microsoft 365, and some roles can come from the SaaS applications and be brought back in, so then you can manage your identity that way. But what I'm trying to get back to is that one of the security features is privileged identity management, where you can do just-in-time access for those elevated roles. One in Microsoft Entra ID and Azure, and Microsoft 365 in effect, but actually into SaaS applications as well, using groups, or if the SAML authentication is capable, just in time, just in time provisioning of user identities, like in AWS.
Okay, and is a lot of this technology cloud centric, or was there previously this type of functionality on premise, and it's just a transfer of those, maybe not the same technology, but those same processes, because obviously MFA is a a newer type of technology. That's probably a bad way of saying it, but do you see something like privileged identity management? You must have to do that on premise, right? That's not just a cloud only challenge.
No, so some of the capability has been available for your on-premise Active Directory. Not this, not Microsoft Entra ID doesn't. Some of this capability doesn't sort of code down to it is cloud only capabilities. But there are other services and things like that that you can do for on-premise identities where authentication is taking place on-premise, as well as your MFA. There are some services out there that do sort of tie in to MFA in on-premise, like Silverfort or Duo. MFA can do some authentication as well in some places. So you can bring some of that capability down with other sort of services. And I think if I remember, Silverfort kind of ties into the MFA for Azure, doesn't it? I think I have to double check that.
Yeah, because I suppose if I'm an organization that has currently got my identities firmly on prem, what's my sort of reasoning for going to Entra ID? Do you think it's the collaborative integrated benefits of it? The fact that it's in the cloud and it is, I'll dare I say it, relatively simple to integrate with other SaaS providers and other workloads, right? It may make sense for organizations to start putting their identities, or at least synchronizing them, into the cloud.
Yeah, I mean, quite a few SaaS services, do have on-premise AD connectors to be able to do synchronizations of your identities into them and potentially your passwords and things like that. But they get to the welcome screen of that SaaS application, and then a user's got to type in their username and password. So every application they're going to, they're typing in their username and password. And don't get me wrong, users will be used to that, but moving to a cloud service like Microsoft Entra ID, you can remove that extra requirement to type in that password because you've already authenticated. And it's also really around managing those identities, because you might have that synchronization in, but then you've got to set up MFA on every SaaS application. So a user's now got 20 MFA tokens on their phone, and you've got to make sure that it's all enabled on every user on all of those SaaS applications, where you're bringing it centrally like you want to on premise, or like you have done on premise with all your your on premise applications, so that you can centrally manage it, disable an account in one place and all of a sudden it's disabled everywhere. It's kind of that side of things. It's really around the life cycle of an identity, really, looking after it. If you've only got one or two places to look after it, then it's a lot easier to lock it down when an account's been compromised. I mean, can you imagine if an identity got compromised and you've got 30 SaaS applications now got to run through and go and disable their account? This is now I disable it in one place, or I reset the password in one place. Now it's changed. That's it.
And I assume, as an identity provider, things like Entra ID are having the investment and the development of not just technologies to circumvent like cloud challenges, right? Like you were saying, like movement of your perimeter, but just general newer thought processes and controls that have been put in place for identities, right? It's almost, is it kind of a world where even if you are on prem connecting to an quotes on prem application, now the sort of, I'll call it, depends who you talk to, I suppose, but the forward thinking best practice is to still use that cloud identity even when you're on prem, right? Because then you get the ability to have you get all of that benefit of that cloud identity, and it's probably wrapped into your license anyway, isn't it? A lot of this, right? Especially at those larger organization levels, right? You've got it there, and then, like you say, you get all the benefit of the simplicity. Because my thought process is, right, if you've got a SaaS application and you need it to talk to your on-premise AD, there has got to be a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of how they communicate, right? And what we're basically now saying is no, synchronize your identities into Entra ID with, some sort of synchronization tool that is Microsoft focused, and those SaaS applications can talk to Entra ID instead of actually punching a hole into the side of your perimeter and connecting directly to AD on premise. Am I just talking nonsense there, or does that,
Well, no, I mean that's a good point. If services rely, cloud services rely on your on-premise identity, what happens when your internet pipe goes down? No one can authenticate because it's not in the cloud. There's things like that. I mean, don't get me wrong. Organizations will have multiple internet pipes and disaster recovery for for those services, but you don't know when someone decides to cut through a fiber cable that takes out a whole data center and things like that, or a data center goes up in flames or whatever. We have seen that in the past where massive data centers have died. It's stuff like that. And bringing that identity up to the cloud means that it's readily available from anywhere, pretty much. And you're right. So quite a few organizations before, as Azure AD, Microsoft Entra ID sort of was growing, users, they used to use ADFS, and I kind of mentioned it before, Active Directory Federation Services, and that was to do, in effect, single sign-on on-premise. Being able to just go to an application, it knows who you are, signs you in, gets rid of that password. But to expose that to the internet, to then do it remotely for other cloud applications, that's kind of what you did. You used ADFS instead to do your SAML authentication. But then you're exposing this authentication identity that you manage, that you've got to patch, etc. And now it's your problem if you don't patch it and it get compromised. And that's what we were seeing, and Microsoft have now brought in, if you have got ADFS, they've now got tooling to tell you basically which application can move up to Entra ID to do it, even on-premise applications. Yes, they have, a user has to go up there to go and get a token, and then it needs to send the token back to the on-premise application. But at that point, you're replacing ADFS in effect from that stance, and Microsoft are patching Entra ID daily. They're seeing everything. It's kind of like what we were talking about with the DDoS. Microsoft are dealing with that. A DDoS attack against your ADFS breaks all your applications at that point. And because you're using a Microsoft Entra ID, you then, like you said, you've got all that security capability. You've got conditional access to say whether you can or can't access it. Even if it is on-prem, it doesn't mean that a potential attacker on-prem then has to go and have MFA to access your finance, local finance system.
No, that's great. It does seem really well thought out. I just assume that the migration into the cloud is a process for organizations to go through, right? I assume it's not a simple black and white, right? We've got to shift like tomorrow, basically, right? There's a journey.
Yeah, no, it's a journey, definitely. I mean, a lot of organizations will probably have Microsoft Entra ID because they use the Microsoft 365, because it's heavily integrated. Or it is the identity provider for Microsoft 365. So most organizations will have it and will be licensed for it. It's just getting the full capability out of it and making that user experience for signing into multiple applications and the security of it, and just enhancing that and getting it right. It's like the where do your devices join? Do they join Entra ID or do they join on premise? That's almost down to how they're configured. Are you using group policy? Should it be Intune doing all that group policy now? So you'll move it to the cloud. It's moving all your workloads, all your capabilities to sort of cloud services. At one point, organizations might still have on-premise Active Directory for all their files, not necessarily file servers, but all their on-premise servers and services. But actually, a user's endpoint might not need to communicate with that anymore because they're going via app proxy. They're using SAML2 via Microsoft Entra ID to access the applications. Might literally be that now they can move those devices and the user identities to Azure AD, Entra ID, and then that's almost like a breaking of. It's like another layer of potential security there, because now those users or those devices can't necessarily directly communicate with on-premise AD and all that authentication. You've taken it away, kind of thing. It's one way to look at it, at least. Those devices now are their own. They don't need AD to authenticate. So someone attacking it, those devices, can't then all of a sudden jump to. There's no direct connection to Active Directory.
Cool, thanks for that, Alan. Yeah, lots to think about. I think it's a bit of a beast, isn't it? Right? I don't mean that in a negative way. There's just, identities are a really important part of any organization, and there's a lot that needs to go in and around that, right? So the big question is, and all we usually end on it, is how is it licensed, and what capabilities available for what cost?
Yeah, so there's a couple of tiers. So there is a Microsoft Entra ID free, which gives you some basic identity. So it gives you, on cloud, cloud identities, MFA, and it in effect has a security default. So it's MFA enabled by default and legacy authentication disabled, things like that. Allows you to do password authentication, and you can start to do some integration with SaaS applications. If I remember, there's a limit on how many you can do. I can't remember what that limit is. But that's what you get for free. Then if you've got Office 365, just as Office 365, you're able to customize your sign-in page. So you're able to put branding on it and things like that. And then you go into the Microsoft Entra ID Plan 1. And then this gives you the initial sort of security features, so conditional access, AD Connect, dynamic groups, and there's various other things in there you can do, and Windows Autopilot and there's a few other things there, like the and the app proxy I talked about, where you can surface your on-premise applications on there. And most organizations are probably at that Microsoft Entra ID Plan 1 via probably a Microsoft 365 E3 license. And that's really key, just to at least get that first tier there, because conditional access is so critical in securing your identity there. And then we go on to Plan 2. This gives you some more of the advanced stuff, so like the identity protection, privileged identity management, and using identity protection, you can then do risk-based conditional access. So depending on the risk of the risk level of the user, determines whether they have to do extra things or they're not, they're blocked. And as part of that as well, you get entitlement management and access reviews. So it allows you to review access to groups or roles continuously. So you can check your attestation of your environment. So it's kind of the key ones there. So they're normally bundled, like I said, into Microsoft 365 E3 or EMS E3 and E5 or M365 E5 or the Microsoft 365 E5 security add-on to Microsoft 365 E3. There's a lot of 365s in there.
There is. One thing I've noticed from this conversation is there are a lot of acronyms in Entra ID, and also as much complexity, I think, in the naming of how, because it's effectively bundled into all of the what I term, I don't know what they're called. I think they're called like base licenses or the productivity
Productivity,
licenses,
yeah.
right? Yeah, you get it. If you buy a plan for a user, it's coming with some level of Entra, isn't it? Right, because it's
Yeah.
it's the foundation of 365. So no, and there's many different ways to piece it all together to get there's people whose job it is to really piece together all that licensing, right, and to understand um how you layer that on, right. It's not just a
Yeah,
simple
and
case.
yeah, and it's probably worth, if you want to check out these licenses, it's probably worth going to m365maps.com.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. Yeah.
because they somewhat I can't remember their name, but they've created in effect a map of all the licensing, including the E5s and everything, and it's really easy to understand what you get for it. It's just amazing, and they update it all the time.
Yeah, and like the Matrix comparison is just like it's amazing because it's like when you get these like really oddball like scenarios, right, where somebody's like, I've got this but I want this, how do I get it? And it's and then like just going through and working out, what do I get if I go from A to B, and like it's just, yeah, like you say, it's really well laid out, and it's consistently updated. I saw it's been updated for like Security Copilot and all sorts of other stuff, all other co-pilots and bits and bobs like that are just like in and around. Might not be Security Copilot because I don't think levels have been thingy for that yet.
No,
Maybe it's
not yet.
365 Copilot. But I was like, oh, here, it's just like it just gets updated all the time. Cool, Alan. Anything else you want to cover on Entra? I think we've had a pretty good stab at it.
Yeah, I mean it's high level, and probably to probably call out, we think we've had like 4 episodes that we've done previously on various small parts of it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
uh,
Let's go through those.
okay, so a couple of weeks ago we did Microsoft Entra external ID, so not necessarily part of it's part of the Entra family, but not necessarily Entra ID. But that was a couple of weeks ago. Season 4, episode 10, we did again. This isn't Entra ID, but it's Entra, so it's Entra Global Secure Access first looks. Season 3, episode 4, we did Privileged Identity Management, and I think season 2, episode 10, we did Identity Governance. Cool, that seemed a long time ago.
Yeah, that was a lot. That's because it was. That's for sure.
Well, I think this is episode 71. I think
Wow.
of our like overall, so it's insane.
Yeah, we're getting there. That's for sure. Crazy.
But yeah, cool. Okay, so Sam, what's next week?
Yeah, my episode next week, and I'm going to be covering Azure App Service. I think it's another one of those sort of I'm going to call it like staple workloads in Azure that we haven't yet gone through. It is a bit of a beast, so there's quite a few bits to go through, but hopefully I can take us through and give some good insights.
Cool, that's probably gonna be well, it's not probably, it is gonna be a good episode.
Thanks, Alan.
Uh, cool. Okay, so did you enjoy this episode? If so, please do consider leaving us a review on Apple or Spotify. This really helps us reach out to more people like you. If you have any specific feedback or suggestions, we have a link in our show notes to get in contact with us.
Yeah, and if you made it this far, thanks very much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Yeah, thanks all.